The man who risked it all for a cheap imitation and lost his queen. What happens when a man who cruelly scorns his pregnant wife for a younger model suddenly finds himself in the front row to witness her spectacular return? Ethan thought he had it all. A new, sultry girlfriend he boasted looked like a movie star, and the freedom from his boring previous life. He couldn't stop rubbing it in his ex-wife Olivia's face, but he never imagined that while he was busy showing off his cheap imitation, Olivia was being discreetly courted by one of the world's most reclusive billionaires. Get ready for a story of ultimate revenge, where the red carpet becomes a battlefield, and a scorned woman's triumph is witnessed by the entire world. Hello everyone, welcome. If you're new here, remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas. Your support helps us create these stories for you. Now, let's get into it. The collector and his prize. Ethan Pierce was a man who collected beautiful things. His penthouse in the heart of Manhattan's Soho district was a testament to his exquisite, if a bit soulless, taste. Polished chrome and white leather furniture sat on a vast expanse of imported Italian marble. Abstract art from trendy, up-and-coming artists adorned the walls, each piece a calculated investment. His watch was a Patek Philippe, his suits were exclusively Tom Ford, and his car, a sleek black Aston Martin DB11, purred with the promise of power and prestige. And then there was Isabella, his most recent and prized acquisition. Isabella Rossi was, in Ethan's own bombastic words, a real-life movie star. With her cascade of jet-black hair, seductive almond eyes, and a figure that seemed to have been sculpted by the gods, she was the type of woman who commanded stares wherever she went. A 24-year-old aspiring actress and Instagram model, with a following of moderately impressed bots and thirsty men, she was the perfect accessory for a man like Ethan. He paraded her through the city's most exclusive restaurants, a smug smile permanently etched on his face as he basked in the envious glances of other men. "Look at her," he would tell his friends, his voice a possessive whisper as Isabella posed for a selfie at their table at Balthazar. "She has that Sophia Loren vibe, doesn't she? A classic beauty. You just don't find that anymore." His friends, a chorus of sycophants who benefited from his generosity, would nod enthusiastically. What Ethan conveniently omitted from his triumphant narrative was the woman he had so recently discarded to make room for his new movie star, his wife of 5 years, Olivia, who was pregnant with his child. Olivia, soon to be Olivia Parker again, was Isabella's antithesis. Where Isabella was a dazzling firework, Olivia was a quiet, steady flame. She had a delicate beauty. With honey blonde hair she often wore in a simple, elegant bun, and smart, kind eyes that seemed to see right through Ethan's carefully constructed facade. She was a talented landscape architect, a woman who found beauty in the natural world, not in the fleeting trends of fashion and fame. She had been the stabilizing force in Ethan's life, the one who had supported him when he was just a struggling entrepreneur with a dream. She had been his partner in every sense of the word, and he had repaid her loyalty with a betrayal so profound that it had shattered her world. The day he left her was seared into her memory like a brand. She was 6 months pregnant, her body changing in ways that were both miraculous and terrifying. She had been planning the nursery, a room filled with light and love, a sanctuary for the child they had both wanted so badly. He had come home from a business trip to Miami, his face a mask of cold indifference. He had told her, with the same emotion as a man discussing a failed business deal, that he was in love with someone else, someone younger, someone more exciting, someone who didn't have stretch marks and morning sickness. "I need to be with someone who inspires me, Liv," he had said, the casual shortening of her name a cruel twist of the knife. "Someone who makes me feel alive." His bags were already packed. Her world, once a vibrant landscape of shared dreams and future hopes, had been reduced to a barren wasteland in the space of a single, heartless conversation. The divorce had been quick and brutal. Ethan, ever the pragmatist, had offered her a generous settlement, a golden cage to keep her quiet and out of his new, glamorous life. He had kept the Soho penthouse, of course. Olivia had taken the money and retreated to a quiet, tree-lined street in Brooklyn, to a brownstone she had once dreamed of renovating with him. Now, she would do it alone. But Ethan couldn't just leave her be. He seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from flaunting his new life in her face. He would post a relentless stream of photos of himself and Isabella on Instagram, their lives a curated montage of private jets, exotic vacations, and champagne-fueled parties. He would tag her in the posts, a digital slap in the face. He even had the audacity to send her a Christmas card, with a professional photo of himself and Isabella in matching cashmere sweaters, grinning vacantly in front of a crackling fire in an Aspen ski lodge. On the back, in his neat, arrogant handwriting, he had written, "Wishing you a Merry Christmas. Hope you're doing well." Olivia had thrown the card into the fireplace, watching the flames consume their smug, perfect faces. But the pain was still a dull, persistent ache in her chest. She was carrying his child, a constant and living reminder of his betrayal, and he was living a consequence-free life of bliss with a woman who was little more than a child. Her friends, a fiercely protective circle of women who had known her since college, were incandescent with rage. "He's a monster, Liv," her best friend Chloe had said one afternoon, her voice shaking with anger. "A soulless narcissist. How can you be so calm?" But Olivia wasn't calm. She was drowning. The joy she should have been feeling for her impending motherhood was tainted by the bitterness of her heartbreak. She would sit in the half-finished nursery, surrounded by boxes of unassembled furniture and untouched baby clothes, and she would cry until she had no more tears left. She felt like a ghost in her own life, a silent observer of her own slow-motion collapse. Have you ever felt so overwhelmed by grief that it feels like life has stopped? We would love to hear your story in the comments below. Meanwhile, Ethan was utterly oblivious to the depths of her despair. Or perhaps he was aware and simply didn't care. His world was a bubble of self-congratulation, and Olivia was a distant, unpleasant memory he could easily discard. He was too busy curating his image as the man who had it all. He had even started a blog, a pretentious and self-aggrandizing platform where he pontificated on everything from investment strategies to the art of living a bespoke life. He wrote a post titled, "Leveling Up: Why I Chose a Life of Authenticity and Passion," which was a thinly veiled justification for leaving Olivia. He didn't mention her by name, of course. He simply referred to his previous chapter as a time of stagnation and compromise. He wrote about the importance of surrounding oneself with vibrant, inspiring people, and anyone who knew him knew he was talking about Isabella. The post went viral in his small, privileged circle. People whispered about it at dinner parties, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Olivia's name was on everyone's lips, the wronged woman, the discarded wife. She felt the weight of their stares, the sting of their pity, every time she left her brownstone. Ethan, on the other hand, reveled in the attention. He saw himself as a maverick, a man who had dared to break free from the suffocating confines of a conventional life. He was a pioneer of self-realization, a guru of self-actualization. He was also a first-class fool, and his downfall was destined to be as spectacular as his rise. But for now, He was on top of the world, his movie star girlfriend on his arm, the city at his feet. He had no idea that the woman he had so carelessly discarded was about to rewrite her own story, and that her comeback would be more dazzling than anything he could ever have imagined. The seeds of his humiliation were being sown on the quiet, tree-lined streets of Brooklyn, in the heart of a woman who was slowly and painstakingly putting the pieces of her shattered life back together. And when she was complete again, she would be a force to be reckoned with. Ethan Pierce, the man who thought he had it all, was about to lose the one thing he had never truly valued: his dignity. The silent triumph. The first few months after Ethan left were a blur of pain and hormones. Olivia moved through her days in a fog of grief, her pregnancy a bittersweet reminder of a future that had been stolen from her. She would wake up in the middle of the night, her hand instinctively reaching for the empty space in the bed beside her, and the reality of her solitude would hit her with the force of a physical blow. The brownstone, which she had once imagined as a warm, cozy family home, felt cavernous and cold, its silence amplifying her loneliness. Her friends, Chloe and another close friend, Jessica, a sharp-witted lawyer who had handled her divorce with fierce tenacity, formed a protective cocoon around her. They would show up at her door armed with tubs of ice cream, gossip magazines, and a bottomless well of righteous indignation on her behalf. They would listen to her cry, rant against Ethan's cruelty, and push her gently but firmly towards the future. "You can't let him win, Liv," Jessica had said one afternoon, her voice firm as she watched Olivia listlessly pick at a salad. "And right now, by letting yourself be consumed like this, you're letting him win. You need to prove it to him, and more importantly, you need to prove it to yourself, that your life didn't end when he walked out that door." Jessica's words, though harsh, were a necessary jolt. Olivia knew she was right. She couldn't let her grief consume her, not when she had a new life growing inside her, a life that deserved a happy, healthy mother. That night, she made a decision. She would not be a victim. She would be a survivor. The next morning, she woke with a renewed sense of purpose. She started with the nursery. She unpacked the boxes, assembled the crib, and painted the walls a soft, sunny yellow. She hung a mobile of delicate, hand-carved wooden animals over the crib, and as she watched them spin in the gentle morning breeze, a flicker of hope was ignited within her. This room wasn't a monument to her loss. It was a promise of a new beginning. She threw herself into her work, channeling her pain and anger into creativity. As a landscape architect, she had always found solace in the natural world, in the patient, resilient beauty of plants and trees. She took on a new project, a commission to design a rooftop garden for a new luxury hotel in downtown Manhattan. The project was ambitious and demanding, and it was exactly what she needed. She spent her days poring over blueprints, sketching designs, and sourcing rare and exotic plants. The work was a salve for her wounded soul, a tangible way to create beauty in a world that had suddenly turned ugly. It was during a visit to a specialized nursery in upstate New York that her life took an unexpected turn. She was looking for a particular variety of Japanese maple, a rare Yoron cultivar with delicate, lace-like leaves. The nursery owner, a gruff but knowledgeable man named Mr. Henderson, told her that he had sold the last one to a private collector. "A real plant enthusiast, this one," Mr. Henderson had said, his voice a low rumble. "Buys up all my best stuff. Lives on a huge estate on the Hudson. A real recluse, they say. Name's Julian Croft." The name meant nothing to Olivia. She felt disappointed, but she thanked Mr. Henderson and was about to leave when a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the nursery. A tall, impeccably dressed man with salt and pepper hair and penetrating blue eyes emerged from the car. He exuded an aura of quiet authority, a man who was used to being in control of his surroundings. Mr. Henderson's face lit up. "Well, speak of the devil," he muttered to Olivia. "That's him. That's Mr. Croft." Julian Croft overheard him, and a faint, amused smile touched his lips. He walked over to them, his gaze falling on Olivia. There was an intensity in his eyes that made her feel both seen and a little nervous. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," he said, his voice a low, cultivated baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Not at all, Mr. Croft," Mr. Henderson said jovially. "This young lady was just asking about your Japanese maple." Julian Croft's gaze shifted back to Olivia, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "My Japanese maple?" "Yes," she said, her tone more confident than she felt. "The Palmatum Ryusin maple. I was hoping to use it in a project I'm designing." Julian Croft's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're a landscape architect?" "Yes," she said. "Olivia Parker." He held out a hand. "Julian Croft, it's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Parker." His handshake was firm and warm, and he held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. They talked for over an hour, their conversation flowing as easily as the nearby creek. He was fascinated by her work, and she was captivated by his deep knowledge of botany and his passion for conservation. He told her about his estate on the Hudson, a vast property he was slowly rewilding, returning it to its natural state. He spoke with a quiet passion that was a world away from Ethan's loud, boastful pronouncements. As they were about to part ways, he said, "I know this is forward, but I would be fascinated to see your designs for the hotel rooftop, and perhaps, just perhaps, you'd be interested in seeing my Japanese maple." Olivia felt surprised, but found herself smiling. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Croft." "Julian," he corrected her softly. "What would you do if you were in Olivia's shoes? Would you give Julian a chance?" Their first date, as Chloe would later call it with breathless excitement, was a visit to his estate the following weekend. It was a world away from the glitz and glamour of Manhattan. A long, winding drive led through a dense forest of ancient trees to a magnificent stone mansion overlooking the Hudson River. The grounds were a breathtaking tapestry of rolling hills, wildflower meadows, and meticulously maintained gardens. Julian gave her a tour of the property, his love for the land evident in every word he spoke. He showed her his prized Japanese maple, its delicate crimson leaves a pop of vibrant color against the lush green of the surrounding forest. He showed her his greenhouses filled with rare and exotic orchids. He showed her the apiary where he raised bees and the organic vegetable garden that supplied his kitchen. They ate lunch on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the river, a simple and delicious meal of fresh-baked bread, artisanal cheeses, and salads made from vegetables from his garden. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. She found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't to anyone in a long time. She told him about her pregnancy, her recent divorce, and her struggle to rebuild her life. She hadn't meant to. The words just spilled out of her, a torrent of pent-up pain and vulnerability. He listened patiently, his blue eyes filled with a compassion so genuine it brought tears to her eyes. He didn't offer promises or easy answers. He just listened, and in his quiet, attentive presence, she felt a sense of peace that had been absent from her life for so long. When she told him about Ethan, about his cruelty and his constant need for validation, a flicker of something cold and hard entered his eyes. "He sounds like a very small man," he said, his voice low and firm. Olivia felt startled by the fierce protectiveness in his tone. For the first time since Ethan had left, she felt a sense of security, a feeling of being treasured. As the afternoon drew to a close, he walked her back to her car. "I hope this won't be the last time I see you, Olivia," he said, his voice soft. "It won't," she said, and she knew in her heart that it was true. Their relationship blossomed in the weeks that followed. They would meet for long walks in Central Park, for quiet dinners, in secluded restaurants where they were unlikely to be seen, and for weekends at his estate on the Hudson. He was a perfect gentleman, attentive and kind, and he treated her with a reverence that was both thrilling and a little terrifying. She learned more about him. He was a tech billionaire, the founder of a revolutionary software company that had changed the way the world communicated. He was notoriously private, a man who shied away from the limelight and valued his anonymity. He had been a widower for 10 years. His wife had died in a tragic accident. He had never remarried and had poured all his energy into his work and his philanthropic endeavors. He was everything Ethan was not: kind, humble, and genuinely interested in the world around him. He was a man of substance, a man of quiet strength, and to Olivia's astonishment, he was falling in love with her. He never rushed her, never pushed her for more than she was ready to give. He was patient and understanding, and he seemed to know instinctively what she needed. He would show up at her brownstone with her favorite takeout, or send her a bouquet of her favorite flowers, peonies, with a simple, handwritten note that read, "Thinking of you." One night, as they sat in front of the fireplace in her living room, he took her hand. "Olivia," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I know this is fast, and I know you've been through a lot, but I have to tell you how I feel. I'm falling in love with you." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes. "I'm falling in love with you too, Julian," she whispered. He leaned in and kissed her, a soft, tender kiss that was full of all the unspoken emotions that had been building between them. It was a kiss that promised a future she had never dared to dream of, a future filled with love, laughter, and the quiet joy of a shared life. As her due date approached, Julian became her rock. He accompanied her to her prenatal appointments, helped her finish the nursery, and was there holding her hand when she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. She named him Leo, a name that means lion, a symbol of the strength she had found within herself. Ethan, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to the dramatic changes in Olivia's life. He was too immersed in his own world, too busy flaunting his movie star girlfriend and his perfect life. He had heard through the grapevine that Olivia had given birth and had sent her a perfunctory text message. "Congrats. Let me know what I owe you for child support." He had no idea that Olivia was no longer the broken, lonely woman he had left behind. He had no idea that she had found a love deeper and more profound than he could ever comprehend. And he had no idea that she was about to make a spectacular entrance into the world on the arm of a man who could buy and sell him 1,000 times over. The stage was set for a showdown, and the red carpet was about to become a battleground. The red carpet coronation, while Olivia was wrapped in the quiet, authentic joy of new motherhood and blossoming love. Ethan was aggressively marketing his own happiness. His life was no longer something to be lived, but a brand to be managed, and he was its most relentless and obnoxious promoter. His Instagram was the primary vehicle for this campaign, a relentless, high-gloss stream of manufactured happiness. Every post was a carefully composed tableau, designed to scream effortless success and cool. Ethan and Isabella, clinking champagne flutes on a private jet to St. Bart's. The caption, a casual, work hard, play hard. The two of them in matching Fendi ski suits in a Courchevel chalet, looking artfully disheveled. Isabella posing with a Birkin handbag, newly acquired and breathtakingly expensive, on the Pont des Arts in Paris. A love lock with their initials visible just over her shoulder. The zenith of this PR offensive was an 8-page spread in Prestige Living, a glossy magazine whose primary function was to flatter the egos of the newly rich. The article, brazenly titled "The Art of the Upgrade: Ethan Pierce on Life, Love, and Living Authentically," was a masterclass in narcissistic revisionist history. In it, Ethan, photographed in his stark Soho penthouse, pontificated on his personal philosophy, a toxic blend of plagiarized self-help quotes and breathtaking hypocrisy. "Authenticity is everything," he was quoted as saying, his face airbrushed to a weird, radiant smoothness on the page. "It means having the courage to audit your life, to identify the elements that no longer serve your highest self, and to have the strength to cut them out." The thinly veiled cruelty was stunning. He referred to his 5-year marriage not by name but as his previous chapter, a time of comfortable stagnation and muted colors. He spoke of his new life with Isabella as an explosion of vitality, a return to passion. The accompanying photos were a grotesque parody of intimacy. There was Isabella, draped in a sheer silk tunic, posed on the edge of his vast, unwrinkled bed, feeding him a single, perfect strawberry. There was Ethan, staring thoughtfully out his floor-to-ceiling windows, with a glass of Macallan XV5 in his hand, as if contemplating the secrets of the universe instead of his stock portfolio. It was less a portrait of a relationship and more an advertisement for a life that no one was truly living. The article landed like a grenade in their old social circle. Olivia's best friend Chloe was the one to break the news, calling Olivia in a state of incandescent fury. "You are not going to believe this self-righteous pig," she shrieked into the phone, proceeding to read the most offensive passages aloud. Olivia, who was rocking a fussy, milk-drunk Leo in her arms, listened in silence. The familiar acidic sting of betrayal pricked her, but to her own surprise, it was a distant sensation, a phantom limb of a pain that had mostly healed. When Chloe emailed her the link, she opened it on her laptop. She looked at the glossy, sterile images of the man she had once loved and the girl who had replaced her. They looked like two beautiful, expensive mannequins, their smiles vacant, their poses stiff. There was no life in their eyes. She looked down at the warm, snoring baby nestled against her chest, at his tiny fist clutching her finger, and a wave of profound peace washed over her. She pressed a soft kiss to his head, inhaling his sweet, milky scent. This was real. This was authentic. This warm, messy, unpredictable, and deeply joyful reality was something Ethan, in his cold and curated world, would never understand. She closed the laptop, not with anger, but with a sudden and overwhelming wave of pity. He wasn't living a life. He was upholding a facade, and that had to be an exhausting and empty existence. When Julian visited her that night, he found the magazine open on the coffee table. He read the article in silence, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Olivia watched him, and when he was done, he gently set it down and looked at her, his penetrating blue eyes filled with a quiet, protective fire. "He's terrified," Julian said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Men like that, men who need to shout their happiness from the rooftops, are the ones who have the least of it. It's an act to convince himself, not the world. He's a very small man, Olivia, making a very loud noise to distract himself from his own emptiness." His words were a balm that extinguished the last embers of her pain. He didn't just console her, he armed her with clarity, a new lens through which to view the man who had broken her heart. Ethan wasn't a titan to be feared, but a hollow shell to be pitied. In the months that followed, Olivia's world continued to expand, while Ethan's, unbeknownst to him, began to shrink. Her rooftop garden project for the new Nomad Hotel was completed to rave reviews. It was a masterpiece of sustainable design, a lush urban oasis that felt both wild and serene. Her work earned her the prestigious National Landscape Design Award, a major honor in her field. At the awards ceremony, she walked on stage, her pregnant figure elegant in a simple, well-cut dress, and gave a brief, humble speech, thanking her team and speaking of her belief that creating green spaces in cities was an act of radical hope. The award led to a feature of her own, not in a frivolous lifestyle circular, but in Architectural Digest. The photo shoot was the antithesis of Ethan's. The photographer shot in natural light, capturing Olivia in her element. In the sun-drenched living room of her brownstone, her hands smudged with charcoal from sketching, or on the finished hotel rooftop, her face alight with a genuine smile as she inspected a blooming vine. The article celebrated her talent, her vision, and her quiet, profound contribution to the beauty of the world. It was a dignified and powerful testament to her resilience and her craft. Do you identify with Olivia's journey to find happiness in authenticity rather than fame? Her life with Julian deepened into the kind of partnership she had always craved. He seamlessly became a part of her world, and Leo's. He was a man of immense wealth and influence, but he found his greatest joy in the simplest things. He would lie on the floor of the brownstone for hours, his deep laughter echoing as he made silly faces at Leo. He learned to distinguish Leo's tired cry from his hungry one. He was there for the first real smile, the first coup, the first time Leo rolled over. A moment they celebrated with the same quiet reverence as a major business deal. They were a family forged not out of obligation, but out of a deep, steady, and quiet love. Ethan, meanwhile, was discovering that a life built on novelty has a very short shelf life. The dazzling excitement of Isabella was fading, revealing a chasm of incompatibility. Their conversations, which he had once found refreshingly simple, now struck him as painfully boring. A looping track of celebrity gossip, brand names, and complaints about her Instagram algorithm. Her entire existence was performative, lived through the lens of her phone. He would try to talk to her about a new business venture or an article he had read, and her eyes would glaze over before she would interrupt him to ask if he thought a particular filter made her look divine. He was living with a beautiful, animated ghost. A strange, gnawing curiosity began to consume him. He started thinking about Olivia constantly. He found her new, private Instagram account. A friend of a friend had let it slip. He created a fake profile to follow it. What he saw was a quiet gut punch. Her feed wasn't a performance. It was a diary. It was filled with candid, sun-drenched photos. Leo's feet, impossibly tiny. Olivia, laughing with dirt on her cheek from her garden. A close-up of the blueprints for a new project. It was a life of substance, a life that felt real. He saw the photo from her awards night, holding the heavy, elegant trophy, looking radiant and utterly in her own power. Then he saw the one that stopped his breath. It was a candid photo, probably taken by a friend. Olivia and a man were sitting on a park bench, sharing a coffee. The man had his arm around her and was looking at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration that sent a wave of hot, possessive anger through Ethan. Who the hell was this guy? His fingers flew across the keyboard. He searched her name, the awards, the hotel project, and then he found him. The man in the photo wasn't just a new boyfriend. He was Julian Croft. A quick, frantic search pulled up a handful of old, rare Forbes and Wall Street Journal articles. Tech visionary, philanthropist, recluse, and a net worth with so many commas that it made Ethan's considerable wealth look like a rounding error. The blood drained from Ethan's face. A cold, sick dread settled in his stomach. He had left Olivia for an aspiring actress. He had boasted that he had a movie star, and she, quietly, without any fanfare, had ended up with a man who could buy the entire movie studio, its catalog, and the island they filmed on. The sheer cosmic scale of his miscalculation was stunning. He saw himself not as the man who had upgraded, but as the fool who had traded a winning lottery ticket for a handful of magic beans. The final act was set in motion a few weeks later. The Met Gala, the absolute pinnacle of the social calendar, was approaching. "I'm one of the co-chairs this year," Julian mentioned casually one night as they cleaned up after dinner, Leo asleep in his bassinet nearby. "And I was hoping my partner would do me the honor of attending with me." Olivia froze, a dishcloth in her hand. The idea was terrifying. The cameras, the crowds, the judgment. It was everything she had spent the last year escaping from. "Oh, Seb, I don't think I can," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "That world, it's not me. I've been so happy being invisible." Julian walked over to her, took the dishcloth from her hands, and wrapped her in his arms. He looked her straight in the eyes, his gaze steady and reassuring. "I know, and I wouldn't ask you if it was just about a party," he said softly. "Think of it differently. It's not about going back into their world. It's about you stepping into yours on your own terms. I want the world to see the woman that I see every day. Not the scorned wife from the tabloids, but the brilliant, strong, beautiful artist who is creating the most incredible life. This isn't a performance, Olivia. It's a coronation. Your coronation." She looked at him, at the utter belief in his eyes, and felt her fear begin to recede, replaced by a nascent flicker of excitement. He wasn't asking her to be an accessory. He was asking her to take her crown. "Okay," she exhaled, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Okay, I'll go." The next day, she made a call to a stylist. Julian had recommended a legend known for creating iconic, elegant looks. As she described her vision, something graceful, powerful, and unshakably her. She felt a sense of purpose solidify inside her. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Pierce was pulling every string he could, calling in every favor he was owed to secure his own tickets to the gala. He finally got them, and he and Isabella immediately began planning their red carpet assault, plotting a coordinated look designed to get them noticed. He had no idea he was a supporting actor in a drama he didn't even know was being written. He was preparing for a party, while Olivia was preparing for a resurrection. Do you think the Met Gala is the perfect place for an ending like this? And what do you think Olivia's iconic look will be? The final act, the night of the Met Gala, was less a party and more a controlled detonation of fame and fashion. It was a sensory assault, a gleaming maelstrom on the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The very air seemed to vibrate, thick with the percussive roar of hundreds of photographers shouting, the frantic click of 1,000,000 camera shutters, and the electric hum of the crowd pressed against the barricades, their cell phones held aloft like a sea of digital offerings. This year's theme, Celestial Bodies, had inspired a parade of ethereal and often extravagant creations, turning the grand staircase into a river of silk, satin, and starlight. It was a night for legends, not for amateurs. Into this crucible of judgment came Ethan and Isabella. Their entrance was as subtle as a car alarm. The hired vintage Rolls-Royce, a monstrous confection of cream and chrome, was so ostentatiously large it had trouble turning onto the carpet, causing a momentary, embarrassing traffic jam. Inside, Ethan had spent the last moments giving Isabella a frantic whispered pep talk. "Remember, chin up, look bored, indifferent, like you belong here. Don't smile too much, It looks desperate. And for God's sake, let me do the talking if anyone from Vogue approaches." Isabella, who was busy applying a final coat of sticky lip gloss in her phone's camera, just nodded. The advice washed over her like a gentle, unheeded wave. "Don't you worry, babe," he had said, ridiculously clad in a navy velvet Tom Ford tuxedo with a satin lapel so wide it looked like a pair of wings. His bow tie, a matching velvet monstrosity, threatened to upstage his chin. He plastered a smirk on his face, a pathetic imitation of the confident swagger he had seen in movies, and struck a pose. Isabella exited after him, a human disco ball stuffed into a silver-sequined dress, with a neckline that plunged to her navel and a slit that rode precariously high on her thigh. The dress was designed not to be admired, but to be noticed. A desperate plea for attention in a room full of confident whispers. They were an assault on the senses, a garish splash of new money and limitless ego. They posed together, their movements stiff, choreographed, and utterly devoid of warmth. Ethan's hand on Isabella's back looked less like an affectionate caress and more like he was maneuvering a piece of furniture into place. Isabella cycled through her 3 signature poses: the pout, the sultry over-the-shoulder, and the hand-on-hip smirk. The veteran photographers in the lineup, men and women who could spot a fake from 100 yards away, took their obligatory shots with an air of tired disdain before turning their lenses, looking for a more authentic moment. A true star. Ethan, however, was locked in a fortress of self-deception. In his mind, the flashes were a confirmation of his status. The shouts were for him. He was the man who had it all, the movie star girlfriend, the bespoke life, a ticket to the most exclusive party on the planet. He felt a surge of triumphant joy. He scanned the crowd, his eyes hungry for recognition, for the looks of envy he was sure he was receiving. He was here. He had arrived. He had no idea that he was simply the opening act for his own execution. Then, a palpable shift happened on the carpet. A quiet authority replaced the chaotic energy. The frantic shouting from the press corps died down, replaced by an expectant murmur. A sleek black Bentley Mulsanne, the automotive equivalent of a perfectly tailored tuxedo, pulled up in silent dignity. Its presence was a statement of a wealth so profound and so discreet that the garish Rolls-Royce, parked in front of it, suddenly looked like a cheap toy. The chauffeur opened the door, and Julian Croft emerged. He needed no crushed velvet or an oversized bow tie. In an exquisitely cut, classic Tom Ford tuxedo, he radiated a power that was both innate and absolute. He moved with an unhurried grace, a man completely at ease in his own skin and in whatever setting he chose to occupy. He turned, ignoring the now frantic press, and held out a hand to the dark interior of the car. And then Olivia stepped out. It wasn't an entrance. It was a revelation. The world seemed to hold its breath. A collective gasp rippled through the press line, a sound of pure, unadulterated awe. Olivia Parker, a woman the world had forgotten, had just become the undisputed center of the universe. She was a vision from a dream, a celestial Madonna brought to life. Her dress, a custom creation by a revered Parisian couturier, was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk chiffon that looked as if it had captured the night sky itself. The fabric flowed around her, falling in soft, ethereal layers that draped her 7-month pregnant form, not to conceal it, but to celebrate it, to frame it as the miracle it was. The neckline was a graceful, off-the-shoulder sweep, and from her neck, a single, magnificent diamond necklace, a gift from Julian, rested against her collarbone, glittering like a captured constellation. Her honey blonde hair was swept up in an intricate low bun, revealing the elegant line of her neck, her face superior. Free of the heavy makeup favored by women like Isabella, was luminous. She glowed with an inner radiance, a serene and confident joy that no cosmetic could ever replicate. She wasn't playing a part. She was simply, magnificently, herself. Julian's hand rested gently on the small of her back, his touch at once protective and proud. He looked at her not as an accessory, but as his queen. They were a tableau of genuine love, of quiet strength, of a power so profound it didn't need to announce itself. The photographers, who had been lethargic just moments before, erupted. The sound was a deafening, continuous roar of shutters, a desperate, frantic scramble to capture an image that was already iconic. They weren't just taking a picture. They were witnessing a moment. "Olivia! Olivia! Look this way! Miss Parker! Over here! Beautiful!" The shouts were no longer dismissive. They were reverent. Ethan stood frozen 20 feet away, the smug smile melting off his face like wax. His mind struggled to process the vision before him. It was as if he were looking at a stranger. This radiant, celestial being couldn't be his Olivia, the quiet, sensible woman he had deemed bland and uninspiring. The woman he had discarded was now the most breathtaking creature he had ever seen. His gaze flickered from Olivia's serene presence to Isabella, who was now adjusting her dress, looking annoyed that the attention had shifted. In the bright glow of Olivia's authentic light, Isabella's sequins suddenly looked cheap. Her practiced pout looked vulgar. Her overtly sexual dress looked desperate. He had bragged to his friends that he had traded in a sedan for a sports car. Now he saw the devastating truth. He had traded a priceless work of art for a cheap, factory-made replica. The realization was a physical blow. A wave of vertigo washed over him, and the triumphant sounds of the gala faded into a dull roar in his ears. Every cruel word he had ever said to her came rushing back to him, each one a new stab of shame. He had called her life stagnation. He had called himself a pioneer of authenticity. The hypocrisy was so vast, so profound, it threatened to swallow him whole. He and Isabella were now completely invisible, two ghosts haunting the edge of the frame. The entire world was focused on Olivia and Julian as they began to ascend the grand staircase. As she passed the spot where Ethan was standing, paralyzed, Olivia's gaze, for one single, crushing split second, met his. He braced himself for a look of triumph, of anger, of smug satisfaction. He would have welcomed it, but it never came. Instead, her eyes held only a quiet, profound pity. It was a look that didn't say, "I told you so." It said, "I'm so sorry for you." It was the look one gives to something broken, something small and sad. And in that one devastating gaze, she stripped him of his anger, his pride, and the last vestiges of his dignity. He wasn't her villain. He wasn't even a footnote. He was simply an object of her compassion. That was the deepest cut of all. The rest of the night was a masterclass in public humiliation. Inside the museum, while Olivia and Julian were personally greeted by Anna Wintour and escorted to the co-chairs table at the very heart of the gala, Ethan and Isabella were directed by an assistant with a clipboard to a table in the far reaches of the room. It was a social Siberia, populated by reality stars, TikTok influencers, and the forgotten plus ones of more important people. The air at their table was thick with the desperate energy of people who knew they didn't quite belong. From his miserable vantage point, Ethan was forced to watch the main event. He saw Olivia, seated next to a legendary film director, deep in animated conversation, her laughter ringing out softly. He saw Julian, in a deep discussion with a tech visionary who had changed the world. They weren't just attending the party, they were the party. The final straw for his ego came during the night's speeches. Julian took the stage, and the vast room fell silent. He spoke eloquently about the museum, about the power of art. Then his voice softened, and he directed his gaze right to Olivia. Art, in its highest form, allows us to see the world anew, he said, his voice resonating with deep emotion. And tonight, I'm here with the greatest artist I have ever known, my partner, Olivia Parker, who has taught me the true meaning of resilience, grace, and the transformative power of a loving heart. She has taken the broken pieces of a life and is building a masterpiece of strength and beauty, and she is creating our family's own masterpiece right now. He gestured softly to her, a look of overwhelming love on his face. Thank you for inspiring me and the world every day. The room erupted in a wave of heartfelt applause. Olivia's eyes glistened with tears as she looked at him. Her expression, a perfect portrait of love, was all he needed. Ethan felt the applause like a series of physical blows. He had had that love. He had held that masterpiece in his hands, and in his blind, arrogant stupidity, he had thrown it into the fire. He risked a glance at Isabella. She had missed the entire speech. She was hunched over her phone, her face lit by its pale light, furiously editing a selfie she had taken of her dessert plate, her thumb swiping through filters, completely absorbed in her own small digital world. He looked from her vacant expression to the radiant, beloved woman across the room. He had boasted to everyone that his lover looked like a movie star, but his pregnant ex-wife had become royalty. And he, Ethan Pierce, the self-proclaimed king of the upgrade, was nothing more than a jester in the ruins of his own pathetic kingdom. And there you have it. A story of love, loss, and the most satisfying ultimate revenge. Olivia's journey from a shattered, discarded wife to a radiant, empowered woman on the arm of a man who truly valued her is a powerful reminder that our stories are not defined by those who leave us, but by the strength we find within ourselves to rewrite our own endings. Ethan, in his blind arrogance, thought he could simply upgrade, but he learned the hard way that true worth is not found in flashy appearances, but in the quiet, unshakable strength of a person's character. What did you think of Olivia's incredible transformation? Let us know in the comments. If you liked this story and want to see more tales of epic comebacks and karmic justice, don't forget to like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will make you cheer. Your support helps us keep bringing you the stories you love. Thanks for watching. A coward's lie. He told her, "I love someone else," knowing she was pregnant with his child. 2 years later, he saw her again, hand in hand with his identical triplet daughters. The office was silent. Far too silent for a building that commanded a billion-dollar empire. Iris Adams stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city blur beneath her. She could see her reflection in the glass, her soft blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, her hands trembling slightly as they rested on her abdomen. Her sky-blue eyes were filled with a fragile hope. Behind her, Nathan Reed stood like a sculpture of himself, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, his dark hair perfectly coiffed, those same piercing blue eyes that once looked at her as if she were his entire world. Now they were cold, distant, as if looking right through her. "I love someone else," he said, the words cutting through the air with brutal precision. His voice was calm, rehearsed. But his fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Iris turned slowly, as if the movement itself was painful. She searched his face, desperate for a crack in the mask, a sign that he was lying. To himself. But there was nothing. Only a void. "You know I'm pregnant, Nathan?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but the weight of those words seemed to pull the walls closer. "I know," he said, his eyes flicking briefly to her stomach, where their unborn child was growing. "That's why it has to be this way." It was surreal. The man who once whispered promises in her ear, who had held her as if she were fragile and sacred, now stood before her like a stranger. Iris's lips parted, but no words came out. What was there to say? Begging was beneath her. Anger would only shatter her. So she just stood there, breathing, fighting the urge to collapse. Her heart screamed, but her face remained still. "I hope she was worth it," Iris said finally, the only defense she had left. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to the end. Nathan didn't follow her. He didn't say a word. The doors closed, sealing off the man she thought she knew. As the elevator descended, Iris placed a hand on her belly, feeling a soft flutter from within. A tear rolled down her cheek, but her chin remained held high. This was no longer about Nathan Reed. This was about survival. About 3 tiny heartbeats she had promised to protect, even if their father had decided to forget them. The city was loud when she stepped outside. It didn't care about broken hearts or betrayals. That day, Iris Adams promised herself she would never look back. Why do you think Nathan chose to lie to Iris instead of telling her the truth, no matter how painful? What would you have done in her situation? The fortress of a mother. The apartment was small, barely enough space for one person, let alone a woman carrying triplets. The walls were thin, the heater groaned in protest every night, and the cracked window let in the bitter wind, no matter how hard she tried to seal it. Iris had lived in luxury before, in penthouses where the floor gleamed and the city lights looked like distant stars at her feet. Now she lived paycheck to paycheck, every dollar stretched until it was almost breaking. She sat at her kitchen table, which was really just an old desk she'd dragged home from a second-hand store. The sewing machine in front of her hummed late into the night, its rhythm the only music in the empty apartment. Scraps of fabric lay scattered on the floor. She had taken up sewing little girls' dresses, custom orders, through an online shop. It didn't pay much, but it was honest work, and it allowed her to stay home, close to her growing belly. Each stitch felt like an act of defiance, as if she were weaving strength into herself with every pass of the needle. The pregnancy was hard, far harder than the doctors had warned her. From the very first sonogram, when the technician's eyes went wide with surprise, and the word triplets was whispered with a mix of awe and concern, Iris knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary journey. She remembered sitting in the sterile white office, listening to the risks laid out in clinical, distant voices. Premature birth, low birth weights, the strain on her heart and body. There was even a moment, a cold suggestion from a specialist, that she could reduce the pregnancy, choose one child to keep, to improve the odds of survival. Iris had walked out of that office without a word, but her silence was her decision. All 3 of them, or none. The nights were the worst. Sleep was elusive, chased away by discomfort, and the endless loop of thoughts that replayed in her mind. She would lie awake, one hand on her stomach, feeling the soft movements, sometimes a kick, sometimes a flutter that felt like tiny wings brushing against her from the inside. In those quiet hours, when exhaustion and loneliness threatened to swallow her, it was the thought of those 3 little lives that kept her afloat. They were hers. They were real. She had no family to fall back on. Her mother had passed away years ago, and her father was a distant memory of someone who never cared enough to stay. Friends had slowly faded after the scandal with Nathan. In their world, loyalty shifted with wealth and reputation. Pregnant and alone, she didn't fit into their social calendars. One night, as a cold rain beat against the window, Iris found herself sitting on the floor, surrounded by tiny dresses she had just finished sewing. She gently took a sky blue one, holding it against her belly. She pictured a little girl wearing it, with dark hair, bright blue eyes, laughing as she spun in circles. Then another in pink, another in soft lavender. Her vision blurred with tears, but this time they were not from despair. It was love. A fierce, overwhelming love that burned away every wound Nathan had left. Her body ached more with each passing week. Simple tasks became mountains. There were days when just getting up felt like lifting the weight of the world. But she refused to stop working. Every dollar mattered. Every dress she sewed was food on the table, rent for another week, or a warm blanket for her babies. People admired her designs. They messaged her praising the delicate craftsmanship, but none of them knew the true story. None of them knew that the woman who sewed those dresses often wept over them in the dark of night, whispering promises to the children who had not yet been born. The day she went into labor came earlier than expected. Iris had dreaded it, knowing the risks, knowing how fragile everything was. The contractions began while she was finishing an order, and within hours she was in a hospital bed under the blinding white lights, doctors murmuring in clipped, urgent tones. It was chaos and fear, yet through it all, Iris remained calm. She had made peace with the possibility of loss, but somewhere deep inside, she also believed in miracles. When the cries filled the delivery room, first one, then another, then a third, Iris couldn't hold back the sobs. They were small, heartbreakingly tiny, but alive. Sky, Sophie, Sadie. The nurses briefly placed them against her chest before whisking them away to the neonatal unit. Iris's heart broke and mended in the same breath. The days in the hospital blurred together. She would sit by their incubators, watching their tiny chests rise and fall, tubes and wires attached to their impossibly small bodies. She whispered stories to them, told them how brave they were, how proud she was of every small breath they took. The doctors were astonished at how strong the girls were. Against all odds, they were fighters, just like their mother. When she was finally allowed to take them home, Iris stood at the door of her apartment, holding the car seats with trembling hands. The space looked even smaller now, but it didn't matter. She placed them gently in a row, staring at the three faces that mirrored their father's features, yet belonged completely to her. "I'll protect you," she whispered, "even if it costs me my life." And in that small apartment, surrounded by worn-out furniture and the soft coos of her daughters, Iris Adams became the strongest woman in the world. What do you think gave Iris the strength to keep fighting, even when the odds were against her? Was it pure love for her children or something else? The unseen echoes. The city was alive that afternoon, bathed in the soft light of early spring. The streets bustled with people, the chatter of conversations blending with the distant hum of traffic. Nathan Reed walked along the crowded sidewalk, his hands in his coat pockets, his head bowed, as if the weight of his thoughts had grown too heavy to bear. His life, once pristine, had unraveled thread by thread in the last 2 years. Boardrooms no longer greeted him with the same reverence. His last name had become a point of quiet scandal, whispered in the glass hallways. But that wasn't what haunted him. It was her face, Iris's face. He had seen her in his dreams, her voice echoing in the empty spaces of his penthouse. He would wake up to silence, sometimes half convinced the curve of her smile had only been imagined. But each time it was real, more real than anything he had left. He didn't know why he took that route today. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe some invisible thread was pulling him, drawing him toward the collision course he had been avoiding. As he turned the corner into the park, the world seemed to stand still. There, in the middle of the trees just beginning to show their first green buds, a woman stood by a bench, adjusting the straps on a stroller. Her hair caught the light, a soft halo of blonde that stole his breath. His steps faltered, slowing until he stopped completely. The city faded into a blur around him. Iris. But it wasn't just her. The stroller wasn't for a single child. There were 3 small seats, and in them sat 3 tiny little girls, identical in their perfection. Dark hair peeked out from under pastel hats, and when one of them turned her head, Nathan saw it. The same penetrating shade of blue that greeted him every morning in the mirror. For a moment he couldn't move. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a deafening drum. It was surreal, like watching his own life unfold in front of him from the outside. They were real, flesh and blood. His daughters. Iris noticed him then. Their eyes met across the distance, and Nathan felt the sharp sting of her gaze. There was no hatred in her expression, no drama, no accusing gesture. What he saw was worse. She looked at him as if he were nobody, a stranger, a passerby, as if every memory they had shared was buried under the rubble of his betrayal. She bent down, unhurriedly, lifting one of the girls into her arms, cradling her close while she adjusted the other 2 in the stroller. It was an act of simple motherhood, but to Nathan it was like watching an entire lifetime he had lost. He could see the small gestures, the way Iris's fingers gently brushed the child's cheek, the softness in her eyes, which had once been reserved for him. He took a step forward, then another. His mouth opened, but no words came out. What could he say? That he was sorry? That he had made a mistake? Those words felt grotesque, empty, unworthy of the woman standing before him, who had raised 3 daughters in a world that had turned its back on her. Iris's expression remained calm, but her grip on the child in her arms tightened slightly. She was protecting them, not out of fear, but out of instinct. She was a mother now, and Nathan realized in that moment that he no longer had any right to her or to them. Still, his body moved of its own accord, driven by the desperate ache inside him. "Iris," he said, but his voice was hoarse, barely audible against the noise of the park. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned her back to him, adjusting the stroller straps with a methodical precision. One of the girls let out a soft giggle, oblivious to the storm brewing in the air. Nathan felt the distance stretch between them, wider than the few steps that separated their bodies. He stood frozen, watching as Iris pushed the stroller forward, her pace steady, unhurried, as if he had never existed. He followed her, though he kept his distance. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was a punishment. Maybe it was hope. He watched them as they moved through the park, Iris stopping occasionally to fix a dropped toy or to kiss a small forehead. The girls babbling in a language only they understood. Every movement was a small miracle, a world he had never been invited into. But Nathan could see it now, clearer than ever. He hadn't just lost Iris. He had lost 2 years. First words, first steps, the quiet moments of wonder that belonged to a child's early life. He had been absent, not because he was kept away, but because he had chosen to walk out of that hospital room 2 years ago, too scared of the fallout. When Iris reached the park gate, she stopped. For a fleeting second, Nathan thought she might turn around, that maybe some part of their shared past would flicker in her expression. But she didn't. She adjusted the sun hat on one of the girls, whispered something that made her laugh, and walked out onto the busy street. Nathan stood there long after they were gone, the wind tugging at his coat, the sounds of the city washing over him like a distant echo. His heart wasn't just broken anymore. It was empty, hollowed out by the sight of 3 little girls who didn't even know his name. But as he stood there, staring at the space where they had been, a quiet resolve began to take shape. This wasn't over. Not for him. He had lost 2 years. He wouldn't lose a lifetime. He turned and began to walk, not back to his office, not back to his penthouse, but toward the only future that mattered, a future where he would have to fight, not for his reputation, not for his fortune, but for the right to stand beside the woman he once loved, and the daughters who had no idea their father had just seen them for the very first time. The battle for forgiveness had just begun. What do you think Nathan's first step should be to win back a chance with Iris and the girls? The unpaved road to redemption. The address hadn't changed. Nathan found it scribbled in a notebook that had somehow survived the chaos of his life. An address he had never dared to use until now. It was a modest building tucked between a laundromat and a corner store, a world away from the sleek glass towers and private elevators he was used to. He stood outside the door, staring at the worn brass numbers, as if they were an ancient code he had to decipher. His hand hovered over the bell, the weight of everything he had lost pressing against his chest. When he finally pressed it, the sound echoed, sharp and invasive, breaking the fragile air around him. Minutes passed. He wasn't sure if she would answer. He wouldn't have blamed her if she hadn't. But then the door opened. And there she was. Iris stood in the doorway, makeup free, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, dressed in simple jeans and a soft sweater that clung to her in a way more beautiful than any designer dress. She looked at him with the same quiet indifference he had seen in the park. But now, up close, he could see the quiet exhaustion in her eyes, the shadows of sleepless nights, the weight of a woman who had carried too much for too long. Nathan opened his mouth to speak, but Iris's hand went up slightly, stopping him before a single word could escape. "What do you want, Nathan?" Her voice wasn't cruel, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was factual, as if she was asking him to state his purpose and leave. "I need to see them," he said, his voice raw, barely holding together. "I need to see my daughters." For a moment she didn't move. The silence between them was thick, as if the walls had drawn in closer. Finally, Iris sighed, not in defeat, but in resignation, as if she had known this moment would come eventually. She stepped aside, wordlessly allowing him into the apartment. The inside was exactly what he had feared, and yet more than he could have ever imagined. It was small, yes, but it was warm. Toys were scattered across the floor, handmade dresses hung neatly on a line, and tiny shoes were lined up by the door. It wasn't a place of wealth, but it was rich with life, with care, with love. The air smelled faintly of lavender and baby powder, a scent that hit him harder than any confrontation could have. "They're asleep," Iris said, crossing her arms over her chest as she leaned against the door to what he presumed was their shared room. "They nap after lunch. You have 10 minutes, Nathan." He wasn't sure if she meant 10 minutes to talk or 10 minutes to prove his worth, but either way, he accepted it. He stepped into the living room, careful not to disturb the delicate order of the chaos. He noticed a small photo on the shelf, Iris holding the 3 girls in her arms, her smile soft and tired, but genuine. He had never seen her look more alive, and it shattered him. "I didn't come here to beg for forgiveness," he began, forcing himself to meet her gaze. I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to understand something. That day, when I said I loved someone else, it was a lie. A coward's lie. My family, my board, they held a gun to my head, Iris. They told me if I didn't walk away from you, I would lose everything. And I didn't have the courage to fight them. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I disappeared, at least they wouldn't drag you into their war. Iris didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt. She stood still, absorbing his words with the same calm she had used from the moment he arrived. He continued, the words spilling out of him now, the dam finally broken. I didn't know about the triplets until after you were gone. I came back to the office, and they told me you had quit, disappeared. I tried to find you. God, I tried, but my father made sure every door was closed. They wanted me to marry someone from their circle, to tie me to their business empire. And he paused, swallowing the bitter taste of his own failure. I let them win. I let fear dictate my choices. But after that day, I couldn't live with myself. I broke ties. I sold my shares. I'm not the CEO anymore, Iris. I'm not the man who chose power over you. I'm just a man who's been walking around empty for 2 years. There was a long, suffocating pause. Iris's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, a flicker of recognition in her expression. But then her arms crossed tighter, as if she needed to brace herself. You think saying that changes anything? She asked, her voice quiet, but carrying an edge. You think because you finally woke up, I'm supposed to give you back the life you walked away from? Do you have any idea what it's like, Nathan? To carry 3 lives inside you while the father of those children vanishes into thin air? To sew dresses at 3 in the morning because it's the only time you have left, after changing diapers and rocking crying babies to sleep? You left. You don't get to come back and pretend a monologue fixes that. Nathan felt the sting of every word. She was right. Of course she was right. But this wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about fighting for the chance to be worthy of being in the same room as the pieces. I don't expect forgiveness, Iris, he said, taking a step closer, though not close enough to invade the fragile boundaries she had set. But I'm not going to vanish again. I'll be here, even if it's just as a shadow in their lives. I'll earn my place not because I want to, but because they deserve a father who never gives up. A soft sound interrupted them. It was faint, but unmistakable. The drowsy murmur of a child waking from a nap. Iris's head turned slightly toward the bedroom door, instinct overriding her posture. For the first time since he had arrived, Nathan saw her armor crack. The mother in her was always on alert, always ready. She looked at him again, her expression unreadable now. You're not coming near them until I decide you're safe, she said, her voice clipped, but not unkind. Not safe for me. Safe for them. Nathan nodded. It was more than he had hoped for. He wasn't looking for a shortcut back into their lives. He was ready to take the long road, however brutal it was. As Iris disappeared into the bedroom to tend to the girls, Nathan stood alone in the small living room, his heart beating with something new. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was a beginning, a first breath in a life he had almost destroyed. He turned to the small window, the city stretching out beyond the glass. For the first time in a long time, the world didn't look so empty. Do you think Iris is right to be so cautious with Nathan? What does Nathan's willingness to be a shadow in their lives say about his new character? The unspoken language of trust. The days after his visit passed slowly, as if time itself had thickened around Nathan, forcing him to wade through each moment with the weight of his choices pressing in on him. Iris didn't call. She didn't text. But she hadn't slammed the door in his face either. That was more than he deserved, and he knew it. Yet the thought of his daughters growing up without knowing him was unbearable. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for the future, even if it meant starting at the very bottom of their lives. Nathan began showing up at the park, where Iris took the girls on their morning walks. At first, he kept his distance, sitting on a bench under a tree, pretending to read a newspaper while his eyes were fixed on them. He watched as Iris gently lifted each girl onto the swings, her hands careful, but practiced, as if she could do it in her sleep. The girls, Sky, Sophie, and Sadie, were small whirlwinds of curiosity, their dark giggles bouncing as they meandered with the chaotic coordination of toddlers learning their world. He memorized every sound of their laughter, every tilt of their heads, and every moment Iris's hand reached out instinctively to guide or protect them. At first, Iris ignored his presence. She would look over at him, offer no recognition, and turn all her attention back to the girls. But he noticed she never left the park as long as he was there. She was allowing him to stay in view, as if she were silently testing him to see if his resolve would wither. One morning, when the spring air was soft and the park was less crowded, one of the girls, Sophie, he would later learn, wandered over to his bench. Her small legs moved with a determination only a 2-year-old could possess. She stood in front of him, staring up with big blue eyes that mirrored his own. Nathan froze, fearful that the slightest wrong move would shatter this fragile moment. He offered a hesitant smile, lowering the newspaper into his lap, his hands open and non-threatening. Sophie tilted her head, studying him with innocent curiosity. Iris was there in seconds, kneeling beside her daughter, her expression unreadable. She didn't scold the child, didn't pull her away. Instead, she just looked at Nathan, her gaze sharp, measuring. Without a word, she scooped Sophie into her arms and carried her back to the stroller. But something had shifted. She hadn't built a wall between them. Not this time. The next day, Nathan came prepared. He carried a small paper bag with fresh fruit slices, the kind that small children loved. He didn't approach them directly. Instead, when Iris sat on a bench to read while the girls played within her reach, Nathan quietly placed the bag on the end of the bench and walked away. Iris noticed. At first, she didn't touch it, but when one of the girls began to fuss, she reached into the bag, pulled out an apple slice, and offered it to her daughter. She never looked at Nathan, but he saw that her fingers trembled slightly. These small, wordless interactions became their language. Nathan never intruded, never crossed the invisible line Iris had drawn. He would sit nearby, sometimes reading, sometimes watching in silence, and offer small gestures. A missing toy he'd noticed, a small blanket when the wind picked up. Slowly, Iris's posture began to soften. One afternoon, a wheel on the stroller got stuck as Iris tried to maneuver it over a patch of uneven pavement. Nathan was at her side before she could even look up, kneeling to fix the wheel with a quiet efficiency that surprised even himself. He didn't speak, and neither did she. But when the wheel was back in place, Iris exhaled, a silent, involuntary sigh that held more weight than words. For the first time, she didn't immediately retreat after accepting his help. The girls, too, began to recognize him. They would point in his direction, babbling incoherent phrases, their faces lighting up with smiles when they saw him approach from a distance. He never allowed himself the luxury of lifting them into his arms or kneeling at their level without Iris's silent approval. But each glance, each small smile from the girls was a battle won. The weeks turned into months. Nathan became a part of their routine, not as a father, not yet, but as a constant presence. He learned their favorite songs, the rhythm of their afternoon moods, the way Sophie would scowl when she was concentrating, how Sadie always claimed the left side of the stroller, and how Sky would reach out a hand for balance whenever she wandered onto uneven ground. He also learned Iris's silences, how to read the subtle shifts in her posture, when to hang back, and when to offer a quiet act of assistance. One rainy afternoon, the park was almost empty. Iris was struggling with an umbrella while trying to shelter the girls as she adjusted the stubborn stroller cover. Nathan walked over without being asked. This time, she didn't stop him. He held the umbrella steady over her as she secured the cover, their hands brushing just once, but the touch sent a quiet jolt through him. When Iris was done, she looked at him, and for the first time her eyes softened, not with resignation, but with a tired gratitude. "You're persistent," she said. Her tone was neutral, but there was no coldness in it. It was the first full sentence she had spoken to him since that day at the apartment. "I can't afford not to be," Nathan replied, his voice steady, though his heart hammered with the importance of her words. The girls giggled under the stroller cover, oblivious to the delicate truce forming above them. Iris's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't far from one either. Nathan didn't need to win her over with grand gestures or empty apologies. It was the small things, the daily, patient acts of just being there. Every cutthroat business instinct he once prided himself on had no place here. This wasn't a boardroom negotiation. This was a slow, relentless climb, step by step, back into the life of a woman who had every reason to shut him out. And yet, she was letting him in, inch by inch. How does Nathan's consistent, small actions change the dynamic between him and Iris? Do you think his persistence is enough to earn forgiveness? The public uprising. The morning paper arrived earlier than usual. Nathan sat at his kitchen table, staring at the front page where his own face stared back at him under the headline, "Blake Eyre Rebuilds Empire in the Shadows." It was a scathing article, full of half-truths and veiled threats, crafted by the very people who once applauded his rise. His former business partners, the board members who had pressured him to sacrifice Iris, now painted him as a liability, a man who had turned his back on his family's legacy for a woman beneath their circle. The article didn't mention Iris or the girls directly, but the innuendos were clear. They had found out he was spending time with them again, and they wanted it to stop. The phone call came later that afternoon. He recognized the number immediately. Jonathan Pierce, one of the board members who had once acted as a second father to him, now spoke with the cold precision of a man delivering an ultimatum. "Nathan, we need to discuss these appearances you've been making in public parks. The company's image is not something we can allow you to tarnish any further. You need to decide what matters more, a woman and her children, or the empire your father built." Nathan had heard these words before, dressed in different tones, laced with softer threats. But this time, they didn't shake him. This time, the image of Iris lifting Sadie in her arms after a tumble, of Sophie's contagious laughter, of Sky's tiny hand reaching out for his, was clearer in his mind than any boardroom chart or stock price. "I already made that decision 2 years ago," Nathan replied, his voice quiet, though every word was laced with steel. "And I chose wrong. I won't make that mistake again." He hung up before Jonathan could respond, but he knew this was just the beginning. The threats would escalate. His former allies had too much pride, too much invested in their image to let his defiance go unanswered. And this time, they wouldn't settle for veiled articles and whispered warnings. They would go after Iris, not directly, but through the ruthless whispers that could ruin reputations, destroy her small business, and paint her as a scandalous opportunist. He couldn't let that happen. Nathan arrived at Iris's apartment late that night, unannounced. He didn't expect a warm welcome, but she let him in without a word. The girls were asleep, their small breaths filling the tiny room with a peaceful rhythm that stood in sharp contrast to the storm brewing outside. "They're going to come after you," Nathan said, as soon as the door closed behind him. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't offer the courtesy of softening the truth. "The people I used to work with, they've found out about the girls, about you. They're going to twist the story. They'll try to make it look like you trapped me, as if you're the reason I left the company. This isn't about me anymore, Iris. It's about you. They'll want to destroy your name to save theirs." Iris's face remained unreadable, but her eyes blazed with a familiar fire, the same protective ferocity that had kept her daughters safe every day of their lives. She didn't ask why Nathan was only warning her now. She didn't need to. She knew how power worked, but she had never been one to bow her head, even when the odds were stacked against her. "I'm not afraid of them," Iris said, her tone steady, though her arms were crossed over her chest as if bracing for battle. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being the woman people whisper about, but never ask the truth of. If they want a story, I'll give them one." Nathan hadn't anticipated her defiance, though in hindsight, he should have. She had always been stronger than him when it came to weathering storms. The next day, Iris made a decision that surprised even Nathan. She reached out to a journalist, not one of the vultures who thrived on gossip columns and corporate hit pieces, but a woman named Grace Adams, known for her courageous reporting on corruption and her sharp sense of justice. Grace was reluctant at first. These stories often ended with the victim's voice buried under corporate PR machines. But as Iris laid out the truth, the pregnancy, the silence, the forced exile from Nathan's world, Grace realized this wasn't just another scandal. This was a fight against the very structure that silenced women and protected the elite. The interview took place in Iris's apartment, with the girls napping in the next room. Nathan was there, but he remained silent, sitting in the corner, watching Iris tell her story. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for pity. She spoke with a quiet dignity, explaining how she had built a life from nothing while protecting her daughters from a world that considered them inconvenient truths. Grace listened, took notes, asked the hard questions, and promised to print every word uncensored. When the article ran, it wasn't in the gossip pages, but on the front page of a major news outlet. One woman's fight against an empire, the story of Iris Adams, became a headline that caught fire within hours. The response was immediate. People rallied behind her. Mothers shared their own stories of corporate abandonment and betrayal. Women who had been silenced found in Iris a symbol of defiance. The internet exploded with support, while the corporate board scrambled to control a narrative that had slipped from their hands. Nathan watched as Iris handled the storm with grace, never stepping out of line, never stooping to their level. He attended meetings where investors demanded accountability, but this time, the tide had turned. The company couldn't afford to be seen as the villain. The Blake name had been tarnished not by Iris's existence, but by the callousness of those who tried to erase her. A week after the article ran, Nathan stood beside Iris as they walked through the park, the girls babbling excitedly in their stroller. People recognized her now. Strangers offered kind words. A mother stopped to thank her for speaking up. An older man gave a respectful nod as they passed. Iris had become something more than a name in an article. She was a symbol of quiet rebellion, a reminder that power didn't belong exclusively to those in boardrooms. Nathan saw the change in her, how she stood taller, how her laughter came more easily. He had feared his world would destroy her, but she had done what he had never dared to do. She had faced it head-on and come out stronger. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park, Iris stopped, turning to Nathan with a look that was softer than it had been in months. "You said you wanted to fight for them," she said, nodding toward the girls. "You'll have your chance, Nathan, but this time, you'll do it on my terms." He nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle into his bones. There was no room for pride here. There was no shortcut to redemption. But standing beside her now, in the middle of a world that had tried and failed to silence her, Nathan understood that this battle was far from over. But for the first time, they were no longer fighting it alone. How does Iris's public choice to tell her story change the dynamic of her battle against Nathan's family? What does it mean for Nathan that he's now fighting on her terms? The beginning of forever. The city had changed, or maybe it was Nathan who had. The streets looked the same, but now every corner held a memory of the life he had almost lost. The imposing offices that once symbolized power now seemed small compared to the quiet strength of Iris's world. Her story had ignited something much bigger than either of them could have predicted. What began as a single article had spread through social media, news networks, and public forums. People no longer whispered about Iris Adams behind closed doors. They shouted her name with pride. She had become a symbol of resilience, not because she sought fame, but because she had stood her ground when it would have been easier to disappear. Nathan spent his days balancing between helping Iris in small, almost invisible ways, and facing the backlash from his old world. The investors who once treated him like a golden boy now looked at him with a mix of confusion and reluctant admiration. They couldn't deny that the company's stock had stabilized, even gone up slightly, since Iris's story broke. It wasn't just sympathy, it was trust. People wanted to believe in something real again. They were tired of polished statements and corporate smiles. Iris's raw honesty had given them something authentic to root for. But Nathan knew that public opinion was fickle. It could change with a single misstep. That was why he walked carefully. Every public appearance with Iris and the girls was deliberate, though never staged. They would go to the park, visit small cafes, always living their lives just as they had before, but now under the watchful eye of a curious public. He didn't mind the attention, not when he saw the way people approached Iris, not with invasive questions or pity, but with a quiet gratitude. Mothers would stop and smile, fathers would nod respectfully, and sometimes women who had been through their own private wars would share a few words of solidarity. Iris never reveled in the attention, but Nathan could see how much it meant to her. For once, she was not invisible. The girls were growing fast. Skye had become the leader of the trio, always the first to explore, the first to defy. Sophie, quieter, more observant, her eyes always scanning, taking in the details. Sadie was the peacemaker, the one who would reach out when her sisters clashed over toys or attention. Watching them grow, watching their personalities unfold, was a daily reminder for Nathan of everything he had almost missed. Every moment, every small milestone, felt like a victory. One afternoon, after a long day filled with interviews and meetings, Nathan found himself back at Iris's apartment. It had become a ritual these evenings. He would arrive after the girls were tucked into bed, and they would sit in the small living room, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in a comfortable silence. But tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, not of conflict, but of something unsaid that hung between them. Iris sat cross-legged on the sofa, her fingers tracing patterns absently on the fabric. Nathan sat opposite her, his elbows on his knees, leaning slightly forward, as if the distance between them needed to be physically closed. She looked tired, but not the kind of tired that came from lack of sleep. It was a deep weariness, the kind that settles in when you've been fighting for too long. "I've been thinking," Iris began, her voice steady but softer than usual. About what comes next. About what all of this means now that the world knows. Nathan listened, sensing this wasn't just a casual reflection. I don't want them to grow up in a story that's defined by what we've lost, she continued. I want them to know who they are, where they came from, but not to be trapped by the mistakes we've made. They deserve more than that. And I think maybe we do too. Nathan felt his throat tighten. He had rehearsed so many apologies, so many declarations of love in his mind, but none of them felt worthy in this moment. Instead, he just nodded, waiting, letting her set the pace. I see the way they look at you now, Iris said, her lips curling into a faint smile. Not with caution, but with a kind of quiet confidence. They trust you. They trust that you'll show up. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. That's all I want to be, Nathan said quietly. Someone who shows up. For them. For you. There was a long pause. Iris's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of uncertainty there, a vulnerability she rarely let him see. I've built so many walls, Nathan. I don't know how to tear them down without losing myself. He leaned back slightly, giving her space, but his words carried a quiet intensity. Then don't tear them down. Let me climb over them. Let me earn every single brick. Her laugh was soft, almost reluctant, but it was the most beautiful sound he had heard all day. For the first time, it felt as if the distance between them wasn't so insurmountable. The next week, something happened that neither of them had anticipated. It was a simple afternoon at the park. The girls were playing near a sandbox, Nathan sitting on the grass a few feet away, Iris watching from the bench. A young female journalist approached, this time without a camera crew, no microphone, just a notebook and a nervous smile. She wasn't there for a scandal or a scoop. She was writing an article about fathers who struggle to come back into their children's lives. She asked if Nathan would be willing to share his story, not the polished version, but the real one. Nathan looked to Iris, silently seeking her permission. She gave him a small nod, her eyes reflecting an understanding that this was no longer just their private battle. It had become something bigger, a narrative that could reshape how the world viewed redemption, fatherhood, and second chances. The article ran under the headline, "The Father Who Refused to Disappear." It wasn't sensational. It spoke of his failures, of his cowardice, but also of his persistence, of his silent acts of showing up every day for the daughters who had no reason to trust him. The public response was overwhelming, but this time it wasn't filled with scandal-seeking whispers. It was filled with letters from fathers, from children, from people who yearned for reconciliation but never found the way. Nathan realized then that the past didn't need to define them, not if they were willing to rewrite the ending. And Iris, who had fought so fiercely to protect her daughters from the world's callousness, was starting to see that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new from the rubble. One afternoon, as they were packing up after a day at the park, Skye reached out, grasping Nathan's hand without being prompted. She looked up at him, her blue eyes large and trusting, and simply said, "Buddy." The word was soft, almost a whisper, but it echoed louder than any applause Nathan had ever received in his life. He turned to Iris, his heart in his throat, but she was already looking at him, her lips curved in a smile that was no longer guarded. In that moment, Nathan understood that forgiveness wasn't a grand gesture. It was in the quiet moments, in the way a 2-year-old's hand could bridge a 2-year silence, in the way Iris no longer looked through him, but at him. He didn't need her to say the words. He could see it in her eyes. The walls hadn't disappeared, but now there was a door, and for the first time she was standing there, holding it open. The air was warm with the promise of summer, and the city felt softer that afternoon, as if even its sharp edges had been blunted by the quiet anticipation that hummed beneath the surface. Nathan had planned every detail meticulously, not in the grand, over-orchestrated way he might have once, but with a care born of humility. He knew that Iris didn't care for lavish displays or empty gestures. She valued sincerity, and he intended to give her nothing less. The park had always been their place. It was there he first dared to follow her, where his daughters unknowingly offered him their acceptance, in the form of simple smiles and outstretched hands. It was only fitting that it would become the setting for what Nathan hoped would be the beginning of their next chapter. He arrived early, setting up a quiet picnic under the large oak tree that had shaded them on so many afternoons. There were no photographers hiding in the bushes, no elaborate decorations, just a soft blanket, a basket filled with Iris's favorite foods, and a small box tucked safely into his pocket. The girls were in on the secret, as much as 2-year-olds could be. He had spent the night before with them, crafting 3 small golden heart pendants, each engraved with their names: Sky, Sophie, Sadie. They had giggled as he explained their special mission, though he wasn't entirely sure how much of it they understood. But it didn't matter. Their presence was enough. When Iris arrived, pushing the stroller with a practiced grace, she looked at him with a mix of curiosity and cautious amusement. The girls were restless, squirming in their seats, eager to be free. Nathan stood up and walked over to them, his heart hammering with a nervousness that had nothing to do with a fear of rejection, but with the importance of the moment. "This looks dangerously like a date, Nathan," Iris said, her lips curving into a smile that was no longer laced with skepticism. "Maybe it is," he replied, lifting Sophie out of the stroller and settling her on the blanket. "But it's not the kind you're thinking of." Iris raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as she began to unpack the basket with him. The girls tumbled onto the grass, their laughter filling the air, oblivious to the tension that was slowly building in Nathan's chest. He waited, letting the afternoon unfold with ease, not rushing, not forcing the moment. They ate, they talked, and for a while it felt like any other afternoon they had shared. But beneath his calm exterior, Nathan's fingers were toying with the small box in his pocket, the words he had rehearsed over and over again swirling in his mind. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the park in shades of gold and amber, Nathan knew it was time. He reached into the basket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. The girls, sensing that something was happening, gathered around him with wide, expectant eyes. He handed each of them the pendants, their tiny fingers grasping the delicate chains with excitement. "Girls," he began, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I need your help. Do you think you can give these to Mommy for me?" Sky, always the leader, nodded with a serious expression, as if she understood the gravity of her task. Sophie followed suit, her lips curved in a shy smile, while Sadie, ever the peacemaker, clapped her hands in approval. Together, they toddled toward Iris, who watched them with a perplexed expression, her eyes narrowed as they presented her with the pendants. She took them, her fingers brushing the engraved names, her lips parting slightly in surprise. Nathan stood up, his heart pounding against his ribs, and crossed the space between them. He knelt in front of her, not out of tradition, but because it felt right. Because Iris Adams had carried more weight in the last 2 years than he had ever known, and she deserved more than a man standing over her with a question. "I know this isn't the life you imagined," he said. His voice was raw and exposed, "and I know I'm not the man I was supposed to be. But every day with you and the girls, I've learned what it means to show up, not with promises or grand gestures, but with a quiet persistence. I don't want to be a visitor in this life we've built together, Iris. I want to be the home." He reached into his pocket and retrieved the box, opening it to reveal a simple ring. No extravagant diamonds, no ostentatious display. Just a band, crafted with care, with a phrase inscribed inside that only she would understand. The three. Always. Iris's breath hitched. She looked at him, at the ring, at her daughters who were now sitting and watching, mimicking their father by kneeling in the grass, giggling at their own private joke. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming truth that this man before her had changed. Not for the world, but for them. Nathan didn't pressure her. He let the silence hang, understanding that Iris's answer would never be given lightly. But then, as if the walls she had so carefully built had silently crumbled, without either of them even realizing it, she smiled. It was a smile that carried every battle scar, every sleepless night, every whispered promise she had made to her daughters in the dark. And in that moment, Nathan knew her answer, even before she spoke. "Yes," Iris said softly, reaching out to take his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, as naturally as if they had always been meant to. "Not for the ring, for you, for them, because we've already built the life that matters." The girls shrieked with joy, oblivious to the magnitude of what had just happened. But their laughter was the perfect soundtrack for the moment. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling not from nerves, but from the sheer weight of what it symbolized. Iris leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his, and for the first time they allowed themselves to simply breathe in the same space, with none of the ghosts of their past standing between them. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the park in a soft twilight, Nathan realized something profound. Proposals weren't about perfection or spectacle. They were about timing, about showing up, about understanding that love was forged in the quiet moments of shared struggle. And on that afternoon, surrounded by the sounds of his daughter's laughter, Nathan Reed knew he had found everything he had been searching for, not in boardrooms or business deals, but in the small, beautiful world that Iris had created against all odds. They sat together on the blanket, Iris's head resting on his shoulder, the girls nestled between them, and for the first time in years, Nathan felt what it was to be complete. The past was still there, but it no longer defined them. The future was uncertain, but it no longer terrified him. And the present, in all its imperfect, chaotic beauty, was exactly where he belonged. The meaning of a second chance, the story of Iris and Nathan, is a powerful exploration of how love, family, and redemption are earned, not given. Iris's journey is a testament to the quiet strength of motherhood. She didn't need a hero. She became one for her children, building a life from nothing and protecting them from the world that cast her out. Her strength is what ultimately forces Nathan to confront his own failures. Nathan's redemption isn't about him getting a second chance at a relationship. It's about him earning the right to be a father. He had to shed his old identity, his arrogance, and the values of his family to understand what truly mattered. His consistent, patient presence in the girls' lives, his quiet support of Iris, and his final act of a humble, heartfelt proposal all prove that he is a changed man. The ring, with its simple inscription, "The Three Always," is not just a promise to Iris, but a recognition of the family she built without him. It's an acceptance of his new reality and his place in it. The ending is a beautiful subversion of the traditional fairy tale. There's no dramatic rescue, no lavish wedding announcement. The true happy ending is in the messy, human reality of their new life. They are a family, not because of a ring or a grand gesture, but because they have chosen to be. They have built their home on a foundation of honesty, respect, and a shared commitment to a future that is entirely their own. The greatest power they possess is not wealth or influence, but the love and trust they fought so hard to create. Their story reminds us that some of the most profound victories are the ones we achieve not for the world, but for the people we hold closest to our hearts.